Welcome everyone. Okay, so today we are going to talk about AWS Lambda. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief overview, sort of like what we are going to actually learn over here. So first thing is what is Lambda? Okay, what is AWS Lambda? Why do we? Why there is a need to use Lambda? Then we will cover what are the features that AWS Lambda basically prefers. Then some of the use cases like where the Lambda is getting used, and also some of the existing clients or the clients which uses AWS Lambda. Okay, so let me start first with what is AWS Lambda. Okay, so before digging into the actual definition, let me just give you a basic example. Okay, so that will just like give you overall perspective why there was a need to introduce AWS Lambda. Okay, so basically let's just consider if we have an application, we just want to build an application, okay, of sending an email. Okay, let's see, this application uses once a year, okay, basically to send any, let's say Christmas email templates, anything like that. Okay, so the traditional way or the old way to do that was first thing you have to buy a server, right? So that is like the one of the so basic necessity is to buy a server, right? Then the second thing that you have to do is to install all the necessary dependencies of your code, right? And third thing is to implement the code. So that is the overall traditional way of encountering it. Okay, and also since it is one time, it doesn't matter like how you are buying the server, you have to buy it for minimum 1 month, right? So this will be the traditional way to go by this. So what AWS did is like they introduced a system wherein they said you don't have to configure any environment that is needed for your code. Okay, you don't have to buy any server also. We will do it for you. You just work on the actual coding. Okay, this was one of the aspect of it. Second thing was you only have to pay for how much you are getting, how much you are using it, rather than in traditional way or traditional servers, traditional hosting methods that were there, wherein you minimum you have to buy it for 1 month. Lambda is saying you don't have to buy it for 1 month. We are only charging you for how much you are using it. Okay, so that is basically the overall concept of AWS Lambda and the concept of serverless. So as you can see over here, it is a serverless service, okay, that is event driven. Basically you can, event driven means based on certain events you can trigger that Lambda. Okay, so this was about what is Lambda. Okay, and I've given you a basic example, sort of like where we have to use it. Okay, so second one is what about the features. Okay, what features AWS Lambda offers, okay, which makes it better than other services. Okay, so first one is save cost. Like I have said, okay, on in the traditional old method we had to buy an entire server for at least a month, right? Over here AWS doesn't allow that. He says like, okay, you don't have to do that. You only pay us for how much amount of uh, for how many amount of uh, request that has been made. Okay, so basically it is pay per use. So how you use it, only for that amount of time you are getting billed. Second thing is about allocation of resources. Okay, here as we all know, like if we consider the email system itself, right? So sometimes there is a possibility wherein the resources that are needed are much higher. Okay, let's say if we consider the Christmas thing only, it will be the resources that are needed are higher, whereas if we just consider another service which is only in a particular country, okay, then it might require some less resources. So basically AWS Lambda takes care of that. So if you want more resources, you can dynamically allocate it. If you want less, then again you can manage the same. Second thing is third thing is automatic scaling. So let's just say sometimes you need let's say there is a sale. Okay, so for that sale, it just comes once in a year, right? In every e-commerce website also. But what happens is that on traditional servers, just because of that sale, you have to upgrade your server, right? Because the number of requests that are going to come during that sale will be way higher than your traditional traffic, right? So just to like over there, Lambda gives you a flexibility wherein what it does is like it automatically scales. It just checks how many requests has been made onto that Lambda and it scales accordingly. It says like, okay, so here more resources are needed, so I will scale it accordingly. And the fourth thing is about the languages that are supported. So in terms of languages, Lambda supports a lot of languages over here. So Java, Go, then PowerShell, Node.js, C Sharp, Python, and Ruby. Okay, so enough of theory. Let's just move on to the practical session. Okay, so okay, so if you can see, this is the AWS console. Okay, so this is our SJI AWS account. So here we are going to first see what the Lambda is and how we can create a simple Lambda function. Okay, so here just have to search for Lambda. Okay, so these are the list of Lambda functions that are already there over here. So let's create a new one. Okay, so now if you see over here, there are multiple options for you. Okay, either you can create a Lambda from scratch. Okay, otherwise you can use a blueprint. Blueprint is basically since this is public, okay, you can there are already developers who have built certain templates. Okay, so if you are new to this, you can just select a template and you can proceed with that work. Then there are container images. Container images are basically if you have a Docker image, right, you can just simply clone it over here and you can deploy it as a Lambda function. And browse serverless apps are basically like uh, it's a public library only, but it's a complete application rather than a blueprint. So blueprint just gives you only the code which you need, whereas browser this repository gives you the entire application itself. Okay, so you can just go through it like how many are there, how many libraries are there, then what blueprints are over here. So for now, let's just start with from scratch. Okay, let's just develop an application from scratch. And just say test PDF. Okay, now here if you see, this is the runtime. Okay, so as I have mentioned before, if this was a server, then we had to manually add the runtime, right? If you want to add PHP, and then if you want to add a Node.js, okay, you had to manually add those dependencies and libraries on that server. Here you just need to select which all library you want to use. For now I'm using Python. Okay, this is the architecture. Basically what kind of computing processor you want, whether you wanted 64-bit ARM or you want 64 by 86 architecture. So this you can select over here, and the rest all things are a bit technical over here, so I won't get into this. So this is basically the execution role and all. So I'll just create the function. Okay, so this is basically an application or a Python application which is already created, Python function which is already created. So if you see over here, there are 2-3 things that we can notice. One is add trigger, and second one is the destination. So trigger basically specifies when you want to execute this function. Okay, so the basic content of the function over here is like this. So this is a demo function which AWS Lambda just creates and keeps it for you. Okay, so this test function will basically print hello from Lambda. Okay, so let's just test it out. So let's configure the test. Okay, So you see, here I have added, I haven't added any trigger. Okay, that means I haven't triggered this Lambda via some other service. I have just triggered it manually using this test button over here. Okay, so if you just see, this entire function got executed. Okay, and this is the response which we have got. Okay, so let's just like go through what other things you can use. So for monitoring purposes and all. So if you just go over here, this gives you all the logs and that you need basically to monitor the entire Lambda function. So let's check the metrics. Okay, so basically these are the graphs, okay, which just tells you how many times the function has been invoked, then for how much time it was getting used. So this is basically to for your analytics purpose. So if you want to check like how many responses were made, then how many calls were made for this particular Lambda function to test. So all these things you can basically track down from over here. Okay, another thing is the resources part. Okay, so as I have mentioned before, the resources which are allocated, those are dynamic, right? So if I just go to configurations, general configurations, okay, so if you see for this particular function itself, we have provided a memory of 128 MB. Okay, so only 128 MB of memory will be utilized by this particular Lambda function. So this is very useful when you are building a code, okay, which consumes either a lot of memory or less memory. So you can just configure it accordingly. So let's just say I want to change it. So I can just alter the memory over here. So in case when there is, like I have mentioned before, if there is any sale, right, at that time we know that the memory consumption will be high. So at that time we can just alter that memory over here. Okay. So there are actually other methods also, or other parts also for this particular Lambda function. So another question would be like, how can we add the other dependencies that are needed? For example, in Python and all, when we use, right, at that time sometimes we need to use some third-party libraries. So by default it won't be there in Lambda. So how you can add? So there is a functionality which is provided by Lambda called layers. Okay, so these layers are basically wherein you can store all your third-party libraries. Okay, and then you can use this layer throughout the Lambda function, throughout the entire region. So if you want to use the same libraries for different multiple functions, you can just assign it. So over here, if you can see here right now, I haven't assigned any layers. So you can just add any layer if there is, if you want to add it over there. So this was about the basics of Lambda, so how you can trigger it, how you can create a Lambda function. So let's get back to what are the use cases. Okay, so one I have already mentioned, like when there is a sale and all, at that time you can basically use this because you know that at that time a lot of resources will be utilized. Second thing is about image processing and all. So in social media apps and all, when you know a lot of images gets processed, right? So at that time you can simply build a dedicated Lambda function that will only process the images. So when there is a huge workload, you can simply improve those resources and your functionality will work properly fine. Second thing, a use case would be a real-time backups. So basically real-time backups means when website backups that we take, generally we do it using a cron job on the same particular server, right? So we built a cron job on same server and from there only we execute it. So cron jobs and all mostly takes a lot of resources. So rather than doing it onto that particular server, you can just simply create a Lambda function, assign all those resources to it and do it via the Lambda function. So this will also ensure that there is not much load on your actual server, and all the backup related things are taken care by the Lambda itself. And third thing is cron jobs. Again, the other cron jobs that you have, you can simply do it using AWS Lambda. So, okay, let's talk about who uses this Lambda, AWS Lambda. So there are many companies right now who are using it, but some of the companies who use it very widely are Netflix, So basically they use for video processing and all. So if you just consider, Netflix has a lot of video content, right? So what they do is like mostly they take a higher quality video series. Let's say if I'm uploading a movie for Netflix, so I just take the higher quality of video, which is let's say 1080p. Then once I upload that video, Lambda gets triggered, Lambda processes it and create copies of it. So basically you maintain multiple video qualities, or you convert higher quality videos into lower quality videos, so that you don't have to re-upload the 480p videos, the 720p videos. So all this conversion actually is done using AWS Lambda. Second is MLB. So this is basically a sports brand, I think, wherein uh, baseball games. So they live stream these. Okay, so over there also they were facing a lot of issues wherein the streaming was giving them a problem. So they shifted from their regular Node.js servers to AWS Lambda. Third client would be the iRobot. So this is, I think these are one of the vacuum clients, I think. So they have their own vacuum bots, who just does the vacuum of your houses and all. So they are actually building internet architecture, okay, wherein they are compiling all those details from these vacuum cleaners, and they are building an AI, to improve the system. So they are also using this. Last one is about what services we can integrate with this. Okay, so the trigger events that we have said, right? We need to make it automatic. Basically, the trigger event that I have done was a manual one. So I have just clicked on it and the Lambda got executed. But sometimes we need to do it, we need to automate it. So how we can do it? So basically these are few of the services which can trigger that Lambda. Okay, these are most widely used services over here. So one is S3, which is simple storage service. So basically, let's say when you upload something in S3, at that time you need to trigger this Lambda. So like this you can use it. API gateway, you can connect it to Lambda to build APIs. Okay, then you can manipulate DynamoDB data. Then again, RDS includes our Aurora or other database systems. So I think that's it mostly. So I have covered like what all things which I felt we should know. So yeah, that's it from my side.